Hello. Hi,
Hello.
Dennis.
Hi, Nick. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Great.
I'm very happy you're my critical friend. Thank you for agreeing to my
Yes.
begging.
Yes. I'm happy you
Um,
reached out.
for our cohort friends, I reached out to Dennis because we both have a similar thread in our research in that, and you can kind of see that in this project, the way we both took to it. And our shared thread in research is the attempt to change behavior on things that are scary for people traditionally, is the way I would summarize it.
Like technology or data.
Exactly. Exactly. So that made reading these interviews really interesting, right? Because these
Yeah, it did.
women, these people are trying to change behaviors for people that were really scary.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway,
It was interesting. So even though I do obviously a lot of data work in my career, I've actually never really taken on a full qualitative project, and I've never done this level of in-depth coding. The coding I've done for other projects has been at a pretty high level, or has been based on more quantitative data. So this was interesting for me to get into a different venue of research than I have before. I took the gerund approach to the coding, which I found useful and challenging at the same time. Sometimes I found that it challenged me to think of how to form, how to take a line and make it into an action. And then other times, I thought um, it helped me think through some things I may not have noticed had I not been looking for that action. So it was challenging. There were other times where I'm like, I can't think of a gerund. I just want to write the theme, but I feel like I
yeah,
have to. I'm gonna stick with it and write it.
that may or
So
may be why I skated right past it.
so what
So I
what
was
was
like,
your approach?
well, I weighed them both, and as I confessed to you, I Googled gerund, and I tried gerund coding, and then I was fixating more on finding the gerund than finding my thoughts.
Yeah,
So I said I threw the baby out with bathwater and just jumped right into line by line. And it was interesting to me because I had a lot of self-doubt as I was sort of doing line by line, like, am I summarizing the right thing in this line? But I just kind of like, Sharma says, I just kind of went for it. And then what I did is I did all the coding within the interviews, and then I highlighted all of my coding in yellow, as you saw when you saw it.
yeah, yeah,
And then I wiped all the interviews out, and I just had this big long list of a lot of yellow.
yeah,
And lo and behold, there were themes, like just smack yourself in the face themes. And it made me feel like I did it right. And that was really gratifying. And then when I saw our focused coding, it's interesting to me, your gerund coding and my line by line coding. It was interesting to me how very similar our
yeah.
focused coding ended up being as a result.
Yeah. I do like your technique of just pulling out all of your codes and just focusing on those to try to get the themes or the focus codes that emerge from those. I thought that was really intuitive. Um, so for me, it was interesting going back. So I used a PDF software, so I was writing in between the lines on my coding. Um, but I am a notorious overthinker. So when I was approaching this initially, I caught myself spending too much time trying to think of really, what to do here and how does this relate. And after a couple pages, I really tried to make myself just go with my gut and what is my reaction telling me? What am I observing here before all my other knowledge and instincts kick in, and try to use that to inform that. I think that approach speaks to multiple people, and I'm sure if we did this across the class, we probably have all very similar themes, and focus
Hmm.
codes that are developed. So it's interesting that we all have very different backgrounds, yet when you look at the text as your data and code it line by line, there's only so many interpretations you can come out of that. So
Yep.
you're gonna eventually lead towards very similar focus codes, similar themes, which I think is interesting, especially given how sometimes qualitative research gets a bad rap for not being as thorough. But
Yep.
I think methods like this really showcase that it can be.
You know what I think that's a testament to, honestly, is the quality of the interview questions.
Yeah,
Because, it's like I was giggling when you said overthinker because I'm notorious for being like, details don't matter. Let's just take action. And it was interesting because you mentioned that it was kind of hard to code, not really having a depth of knowledge on the context. And in my brain, I turned on a little switch that said, okay, if I were writing a paper about these interviews, this is my lens. My lens is, what is the motivation for activism in middle income white housewives in the 60s? And then sort of I read the interviews with that lens to sort of just viscerally pull out my codes. And that's what I did, but also riddled with self-doubt the entire time. So I think that does speak to the quality of the interview questions, that you're right, probably across the board. At the end of the day, there's only so many interpretations. It's just evidence they did a good job of getting the data they wanted.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and that's something in my cycle zero I noticed when I was starting the interviews, and some of the questions weren't producing the answers I thought they were. So I kind of changed and course corrected, and I do think that's a testament to having good interview skills and having a good interviewer who can do that and who can ask the right follow-up questions. And obviously, the interview subject seemed like they were comfortable sharing. So I think that was another part. So however they got involved, they made these people feel comfortable that they could share this information. I
Yeah.
liked sometimes when there was a question and 2 pages of text because they just kept going on and about a response.
Yeah.
So I thought that was
Well,
interesting.
it was inherent in their responses that they were both from different perspectives, were passionate about the topic too. It's
Yeah,
probably, somebody wants to talk to me about this. Heck yeah, I'll tell you everything you need to know. And I think they built that comfort too, because it seems like it was a series of interviews in most cases. So probably they built up kind of a rapport. I thought another thing it might be a testament to is that it was obvious to me that the interviewer had done their research. So, in our research, I don't know about you, but
hmm
what I worry about, oh, I do know about you because we've talked about this, that
yeah,
I worry about when I'm doing my interviews that people are going to be reticent to be open with me, and that
yeah,
my data is going to be influenced by my role as the researcher. And I thought it was interesting that conversely, it seemed like the fact that the interviewer had done her research, his or her, and sort of had some background knowledge that they were feeding off of that. And I
hmm
thought that was really interesting too.
yeah. Yeah, I agree, and that's been a huge concern with my first interviews, and then with this Cycle One project is, I'm the dean over this area, and some people definitely, I've been in this position for just over a year and a half now, and I'm learning that some people who don't, have strong interactions with me, I definitely can get lumped into, he's part of the administration.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, they view me through that lens, even though I don't necessarily view myself through that lens.
Yep.
So that, that definitely impacts what they're willing to share, even, starting the interview off with it, it's anonymous and this is to help the research project and all of that. So,
You actually just gave me kind of an epiphany, because even though I've worked at the U of A for 14 years and everybody kind of knows me, but everybody kind of knows me from the different ways they've historically interacted with me, that what's interesting is that I'm central IT. So I'm sure that everybody sort of, that
yeah,
carries its weight. That maybe it might be beneficial with my users to kick them off with the knowledge that, my background's in enrollment management.
yeah,
So I'm interested as a functional unit, sort of just like, hey, let me take off that central IT mask and put on the enrollment management mask, so that that I'm our viewpoints are probably pretty similar, and that the enrollment management persona is what really drives my research, my intervention, and my reasons for wanting to do things differently.
yeah. I think that's a great idea. And I think it would help people in that area feel a lot more comfortable talking with you, and that they might relate to you more. So,
Yep.
before
Okay, so
we, no, it's okay. A little,
oh
little
wait, we're
tangent, but
recording this.
but it was all related to interviewing, just not the coding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we talked a little bit before we started recording about our approaches to the memos. I really liked Charmaz and just the recommendation that all researchers will approach these differently and do what will help you eventually document and refer to things and make your themes and your process more focused. So for me, I approach them right after I finish coding as kind of a summary of key things I thought, key observations I had, pulled out a few quotes. And some of it was kind of just a stream of consciousness on, my reaction to it. Um, and I thought that was helpful. I did like in the chapter on memos, she did also suggest doing kind of a whole process documentation as you start a qualitative project,
Yep.
to go, to have something to refer back to on how you got ultimately to the themes you got to. And I thought that that could be really useful in our projects.
Yep. And the same, I actually even called it out in my research action plan, that I think that we'll be so in the throes of making sure that we get the right data in our interviews, that I wanted to be pointed about keeping an observation journal in the interviews.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of what people say is in how they say it, trying not to make assumptions, but in how, like, even just their body language, like if they're leaning in when they're making a point, if they cross their legs when you ask a question, if they, shift. So sort of being mindful of the environment and the way they're responding to the environment and the way they're responding to my questions, not necessarily to make inferences, but to just sort of apply some context to
Yeah.
the topic.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you approach the memos? I
Yeah,
thought that was really interesting.
I think I'm such a behaviorist, because I was reflecting and amused by the fact that the data guy did this really awesome, pointed, succinct memo of like, here are my observations and here's the context of those observations. And I wrote narratives. I put Edith and Harriet on the couch and analyzed their motivations, and I sort of processed my themes in a narrative. And I couldn't resist the urge to compare them, like I was talking about with you, that it was interesting, as I was reading the interview with Edith and sort of observing my trends. What I noticed is I would sort of put Edith's interview, like her advocacy experience and her interview, to crescendo. In the beginning of the interview, she talks about, I don't know about sit-ins. I'm not one of those, but Women's League asked me to do this, and then you just watch her through the interview and her history, like her find her voice. To
Mhm.
at the end, she's like, it may, we knew it was the right thing to do, and I knew it was the right thing to do, and that's why I sent my kids too. And and that she really, I thought a really defining moment was the stunned when the guy confronted her about, why are you doing this, and she's like, we're Jewish, we know what it's like to be discriminated against. And I don't think she would have made that observation in the beginning of her advocacy, and she didn't
Yeah,
make it in the beginning of her interview. It's when she started talking about her journey that she remembered that, and that became significant, and it made her more, she connected to it versus just doing it because the other ladies in the league were doing it. Whereas, like, I felt worried for for Harriet. Like, I feel like she's a really good person, and like her core motivation is advocacy, but she definitely, it is obvious to me in her interview, the themes I saw were cynicism,
mhm,
sarcasm, us versus them mentality, and that she sees the world very black and white. And I think that helped her be a good advocate, but at the same time, I pondered in my memo if how her advocacy success may have been changed or influenced by a willingness to be a little more flexible. She does finally express a little empathy here and there, but it's always justified. It's always justified empathy. Like, she was good, that's just not my way, you
yeah,
know? So it was interesting.
yeah. So hearing you talk about that, and just this fairly short activity for what it was in coding practice, it's just amazing the depth that we both got out of this, and like two excerpts of short interviews that we were able to get where we are. So I thought that was really interesting. So I think we're at our time for
Great.
this little assignment. So thanks for chatting about your coding and
Same. I love it. I love
everything.
talking to you. I think
Yeah.
we are well matched, and I'm excited to
Yes.
see what comes out of our coding now. Like, I want to read your
Yes.
coding on your topic,
Yep.
because that will
And
be
then
very interesting to me.
the little papers we'll have to develop from this next week.
Yep.
So
Sounds good.
cool. Well,
All right.
thank you.
Thank
Have a
you,
good
Dennis.
day.
Take care.
Yep. Goodbye.
Bye.